All right, I think we can start. So hello everyone again. Some of you may have known me before. I'm Han Nguyen. I'm the host of the webinar series by Pro Education Solutions. And welcome to this enlightening webinar entitled Fostering Creativity in Classrooms, Evidence, Challenges, and Impact. I'm thrilled to have you all here today. Before we dive into our main topic, let me introduce our esteemed presenter, Dr. Ingrid Lee, an educator, a researcher, an advocate for creative pedagogy with a career spanning over 3 decades, 30 years in her career. Dr. Lee has worked at the intersection of curriculum design and educational innovation. Her work focuses on empowering teachers to embed creativity meaningfully into their classrooms through evidence-based strategies and inclusive practices. Now, about EduVerse, I believe that you all heard of it. A word about EduVerse, the driving force behind today's webinar, powered by ProEd Education Solutions. EduVerse PD Network is a platform for global educators to share and get shared all about education. EduVerse is committed to providing educators with invaluable learning opportunities and resources, from monthly newsletters on cutting-edge educational trends to live webinars every 2 months. We're dedicated to your professional growth, and especially all are free of charge. Today's webinar is designed for educators across all levels, from primary to higher education. We will explore how creativity is a multifaceted skill that can be nurtured in every classroom, despite the challenges and the challenges that teachers face every day. Through evidence-based strategies and practical insights, you learn how to effectively foster creativity, overcome barriers, and create a lasting impact on your students' learning experiences. After the webinar, please take a moment to complete a short survey to help us serve you better. After that, you will receive an email with instructions to download your certificate within 1 day. Now, without further ado, let's immerse ourselves into this enlightening webinar. Feel free to ask questions and observe all you can from this session. Thank you, attendants, and Dr. Lee, over to you.
Thank you, everybody. I could see that a couple of people are having difficulty hearing the webinar. I'm not sure what's the issue there, but I'll get started and get into sharing straight away. Oh no, So I'd like to just welcome everyone and thank you for joining us today. The session's designed as an inquiry into creativity in education, and I think we've had a really clear introduction into what I'll be doing and speaking about. And I do hope that I've answered many of your questions. When you registered, there were a lot of questions that were sent to me also, and I'll address a lot of those towards the end of the Q&A sessions too. So during this session, we will just look at how do we define creativity in education, identifying how creativity manifests in practice, some pedagogic models, looking at some research-based findings, and explore what do I look for as evidence of learning in creativity. Sometimes you'll see at the bottom of each page there are some quotes from either research that I've done or things like that. Sometimes I'll read them out loud, sometimes I won't, but you can read on the screen some of these ideas as we go, and they're used as just ways for you to think around how you're using creativity and how you're understanding creativity for your classrooms. So creativity is a core competency. It's not limited only to the arts. We use it in every discipline that we work within at every age level. And just as a short introduction, I'd like it if you could write 3 words that you would use to describe creativity in the chat. So just 3 separate words, not sentences, just 3 words. And I'll have a look at some of those after, because I don't want to change from my screen. Maybe Han can read a couple of people's responses.
I can see that people are inputting in the chat box things like essential use of technology, passion, imagination, innovation, imagination. I cannot read because it's keeping, flipping up new messages.
Very quickly.
Goal area, yeah, very quick. Freedom, art expression, engaging passion expression, method,
Mm,
uniqueness, incomprehensible, creativity, passion, idea, imagination, engaging, techy, innovative,
great.
innovation, engagement, authenticity. Oh, very good word. Real
Mm,
world application, empowering, unique imagination, freedom, authentic, a lot of innovative. A lot of
yeah,
people just key in innovative.
that's great.
Yeah,
So,
out of the box. Wow, good
yes.
word, good word. Yeah.
So, looking at all the different words that you've used to start ideating around creativity, it's conceptualized across many domains, and that's evidenced by all the different types of words that you've been using. And those domains include cognitive, behavioral, problem solving, and social motivational approaches. There's a researcher called Csikszentmihalyi who describes creativity as an ecological system that links the individual, their experiences, the social environment, and cultural domain. Now, those four areas I've used as a key focus pretty much throughout most of my practice through my career. It's important how the individual views and uses creativity, what their experiences are in using it, and how you're going to get your students using it, as well as yourself. The social environment, how we work with others, how the students collaborate with you in creativity, and the cultural domain. So that's in the countries that you're teaching in, the year levels that you're teaching in, the resources that you have, the curriculum context, and those sorts of things. So this view highlights creativity as socially and culturally embedded. Despite the diversity of perspectives, scholars agree there's no one single definition of creativity. And I think that's evidenced by, the range of words that you all came up with as well. But a creative response to an open-ended task is generally considered as novel, valuable, experiential, and surprising. And again, there's some key words that I want you to keep in the back of your mind as we work through this webinar, because they are important focuses that draw out creativity for your students. Is it something new and novel? Doesn't always have to be. Is it something original? Doesn't always have to be. It can be. But is it about the product or the process? So these characteristics are drawn upon from a range of researchers, and they also emphasise about originality, like I said before. How useful is the creative skill set that is being developed, or the product? And the contextual nature of creativity as a core to its expression, how it actually looks at the end, and how we assess it. So I have cut and pasted some of the work from my doctoral research. I will quickly work through that because I don't want to spend ages reading through it. But there are references to my research that you can have copies to. So in essence, creativity is multi-dimensional. It's about originality, having novel ideas or approaches, critical thinking, problem solving, imagination, risk taking, and collaboration. Sometimes you'll see that I will read through verbatim what's on the screen. A lot of times I won't, because it becomes very speaking dense. But while you're listening, you can read through some of the ideas that are there also. So here's just some other characteristics of creativity. Now, I adapted this from my master's research many years before that, where I did a full analysis of the literature, looking at what are the main characteristics and features of creativity that I can look for in my students' learning, or that I can set up as experiences for their learning. So self-identity and autonomy is really important as a part of creativity. There are times where we can learn on our own and have our own self-expression, and there are times where it's great to create with others, because we're sharing and bouncing ideas off each other, and having that reflexivity of self-reflection as well as reflection from others on how we work with them. A massive part of creativity is non-conformity, which really is about risk-taking, making mistakes, trying things that you haven't tried before, the out-of-the-box thinking that someone referred to, being flexible, trying. If you can't be flexible, it's going to be really hard for you to be non-conformist. It's going to be hard for you to try different things. So think of ways that we can try and get our students to engage in flexible thinking. Maybe sometimes it's about contexts that don't meet what they immediately think as straight away. It's trying to be in the grey space rather than the black and the white. There's also something about having things that are effective and relevant. While not everything we have to teach our students has to be relevant, I don't think. And I come from the perspective that when we are talking about engagement, it's not about whether we find it fun. I know that that might contradict a lot of other people's experiences, but engagement for me is about, has the work that I've set up for the student to do that meets the learning outcomes I've intended, is it doable? Can they do what I've asked them to do and achieve the desired result, not only from a rubric point of view, but from their own internal learning as well? And then I know the student's engaged. Sometimes you'll find it fun, sometimes you won't. Sometimes the creative process is fun and sometimes it's not. On top of the career that we've already discussed, like I've taught every year level of school from prep to year 12 to university, diploma, bachelor, masters, and other adult education settings. I also worked as an international professional artist. And there are many times through that process that I did not do things that I found fun, but through the process and the discipline of learning how to make mistakes and practicing and refining ideas and exploring different things, I could engage in the utmost success of being creative. Sometimes the outcome wasn't what I expected, and sometimes it was. And often when it isn't what we expect, sometimes it works out really well. So originality was the other area, elegance of problem solving. How do we not only go through the process of creating, but how do we understand whether the process is worthwhile along the way? And that's the skill set you're trying to teach your students. That's the creative process. There's something about, when we think about math, there's a beautiful part of solving problems. And, often students don't like maths because it's always focused on the end result. But when we look at problem solving, that's the part of the creativity that instills from a maths perspective or a science one, for example. Risk-taking, again, to take a lot of risks, you need a lot of time. Keep that in mind as we go through the rest of the presentation. And there's also another area that came as my studies merged into my doctorate, which was about combinational, exploratory and transformational creativity. So it's the way in which we combine creativity to generate unfamiliar and interesting blends of processes. So sometimes things will be familiar, and then we'll add something else into the learning experience to have an unfamiliar encounter. And that's the beauty or the elegance of problem solving. And they're the type of experiences that we want to set up for our students, because otherwise they will always keep having the same experience and get bored. So higher levels of creativity come from being able to have that transformation. And that's the key to successful creative practice in education, I think, as well. So let's have a look at how we understand creativity. My master's research also revealed tensions between mandated curriculum, which I'm sure we all have in every country, and teacher autonomy. And that's a really challenging space to work in, because we all have curriculum that we have to deliver, because we have a quality assurance to our governing bodies. And how do we cover all of this stuff and still get kids to be creative at the same time? And I would also say, where do we get to be creative in that space too? Because that is a challenge for all of us. And what I found is that teachers' beliefs are really pivotal to how we understand creative practice in those standardised curriculum constraints. So those who believe that creativity can be developed are more likely to try and implement the supportive practices that will happen. So it really starts with us. How do we understand the purpose and the value of creativity in our programs and as outcomes of student learning? not just as a product or a ticker box. You know, in Australia, I'm not sure about other countries, but we have some curriculum outcomes specifically for creativity, which I find interesting because it's really hard to just tick a box. And I think there's lots of different ways that we can look at exploring creativity for our students. I'll talk more about those things as we go. So why do we teach it? Well, it supports 21st century skills. I think lots of us know this sort of information, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but it's about having the adaptability skills, the communication skills, ways of working with others and collaborating. It encourages deep learning by allowing students to connect that personal experience with knowledge, and that's a really key aspect of creativity, that the development of deep learning. And when we can create the scaffolding for deep learning, we get the creative learning outcomes. We improve our students' knowledge and skill development and their academic outcomes for all students. It's not just the kids at the top, it's for the kids who struggle as well. The beauty about creativity is that it's not something you can give an A to. Do you know what I mean? It's not something that's going to get 100%, because it depends on what you're looking for as the outcome of creative learning. It fosters intrinsic motivation and agency, and they were both themes that came out of all of my research over the years. And I also found that with my doctoral participants, they shared that creativity encouraged perseverance and personal growth. The perseverance is really important as well, because you want to try and get better. You want to try and think differently. And even if you don't do well the first time, you'll try it again. And so we really value that skill of perseverance and seeing something through. It's an important transformational skill, and it's deeply tied to how students learn and grow. So it's about building resilience, motivation, and confidence in our students. The research that I've done has found that students will express joy when they're given autonomy, and they describe how they persisted longer on tasks that allow them to have some personal expression. Figuring out what that personal expression looks like is going to be different at every year level or age group of students that you're working with. And one of the best ways of doing it is asking them. You can set up your expectations, but also inviting them to participate with some of that is important too. From a theoretical lens, creativity closely aligns with constructivist and inquiry-based approaches, where learners actively build on their understandings, their key knowledges and skills. But I also believe that there's a really big place for reflexive and reflective practice as part of creativity. So reflexivity is being able to go, I can reflect on this and I can now do something different, and keep being iterative, that backwards and forwards type of thinking as I go through. That's really important, and they're really founded on metacognitive processes. So creativity and learning is not about adding something to the program that we already do. I really think it's central to the way that we enable our students to make meaning, and how we grow them as thinkers and makers, and the way that they play. And play is really important. It's not just something we do in prep or foundation years. It's something that we do even with year 11 or 12 students, or with adults at university, or young adults as well. I think that's really important. So teaching for, of, and as creativity. So this framework, I think, helps us unpack the different layers of practice that teachers can use to support creativity through the tasks that they design, the skills that they teach, and how they embody creativity as part of their pedagogy. So teaching for creativity can be inquiry-based, it can be open-ended tasks or design thinking. Teaching of creativity is about explicit instruction. Now, sometimes people think creativity is really open-ended and lets people just free for all explore things, and it can, and it does. And there are lots of other situations where you need to be explicit in the instruction of what you're wanting your students to do, so they can achieve those creative outcomes you're looking at them developing. It's having that balance of both. It's about having divergent thinking strategies, brainstorming, reflection routines. They're the explicit pieces of instruction that help facilitate the creative process. And then there's also teaching as creativity. So it's modeling creativity from you with your students. And it's about your improvisational processes, how you're spontaneous with practice, which can be really, really challenging if you're not used to doing that sort of thing. I'll give you an example from my master's research where, like, one of the key findings was one of the teachers was doing all these different creative things, but she refused to draw and paint with her students. And the feedback from them was that they really wished that she would have done drawing and painting with them because they loved the relationship they had with her. They loved creating, they loved working with her, and they really wished that she would have done that with them. Now, the reason why she didn't do it is because she articulated in her interviews that she wasn't good at it and she didn't want to show the kids that she was modeling bad practices that weren't perfect. And I said to her after the research had been finalised that you took away a really fundamental skill of not only the relationship that you built so strongly with your students, but creative practice. And they really wanted to do this with you, even if you were good at it or not. And that was a really powerful thing that I took away for the rest of my practice, because it helped me realize that I don't have to be perfect at everything that I try and create with students. I need to be able to show them that I can be vulnerable and take risks as well, because it's about the relationship of trust that you build with your students. The trust is really key because you're setting that foundation up with them for success. And success sometimes looks like lots of different things. So teaching as creativity involves improvisation, passion, and the courage to experiment in that space. So sometimes it comes across that I make it sound easier than it is. And I do know that teachers will struggle with teaching explicitly. And that was a finding from my research as well. They need a lot more scaffolding. And students need scaffolding, in order to help find those outcomes through the creative process. But it's really about the relationship of time and flexibility and reflection that will help you do that. So we've got always lots of challenges when we're doing any type of practice in schools or education systems. And they're often systemic. These are the things that are out of our control that we still have to navigate while we try and do our practice and the things that we know are really beneficial for our students. And I'm sure that this is similar across every country that is here attending today. Narrow assessment practices, overcrowded curriculum, limited PD on creativity, or limited time for teachers to really engage in it themselves. I know a lot of the work that I do in schools and education settings are totally workshop based. It's not as much me. I'm probably talking more now than what I do in workshops. Having the time to play and learn how to do that is really hard to fit in when you've got all your department meetings and everything else. Standardized curriculum, like I said before, timetable constraints, teacher understandings of the values of formative and summative assessments really take place in that as well. So what do we look for as evidence of learning and creativity? It's a challenge. And some of the words that I've been asking you to think about are some of those things that you would look for as evidence in creativity. So what you need to do is focus on the process and the transformation of learning that's happening. So how do I map the iterative development of ideas for my students when they're trying to come up with a research project or something like that? So it's about the discursive practice. And what I mean by that is, how am I documenting the way they're talking about their learning? So there's something about you as a teacher listening to the conversations as you rove around as evidence of their learning and documenting it. And then there's also the discursive practice they have with each other and how they document that. That's your evidence of learning. So again, this is about the process of creativity, not just the summative part at the end. How do you teach students to annotate their thinking? So I do a very scaffolded approach to that. It starts off very, very simply at the end of each part of what they do. Sometimes it can be, write me 3 words that describe what you did. or write me 3 sentences. Doesn't matter what age group, by the way, because the complexity of the words that they use is based on the year level that they're at. What's the drafting process you're using? And do you value that over the final product? And how are you allowing students to experiment? That's all part of the when we're talking about teaching for creativity, that's what you're looking for. It's in those spaces that they're demonstrating their creative process. How do they use metaphor or symbolism or novel connections in their writing, for example, or in their creation of artwork or things like that? Do they use journals or portfolios to demonstrate growth? Are you able to demonstrate learning continuums in the journals or portfolios that students are doing? So a whole collection of formative work can actually become a summative body of work, especially if kids are able to pick out what they think is evidence of their best practice as well and where they struggled. You've got a more holistic approach to what that learning looks like. Also including peer and self-reflection activities are really important. So where other students are reflecting on how you worked with them. Anonymous is best. There are a lot of digital tools that you can use that allow students to do that, but also just having those conversations in class. They're really important. Not everything we have to do is assessed, because if everything is assessed, they're less likely to have a vested value in it. But if they're part of the conversations, it helps them understand when I do something that's a low risk entry of assessment, if you want to call it that, I'm more likely to take a risk with it. I'm more likely to play with language. I'm more likely to want to engage with others. And then at other times, you will assess it. So the table that I gave you before, earlier in the presentation, you could use that as a reference to build your outcomes of creativity. In my research, participants have used visual journals, multimodal text, feedback loops as indicators as well. And I think that creativity learning or creative learning leaves behind traces. It's in the questions that students ask. Sometimes kids ask really profound questions. That's evidence of their creative thinking. The risks that they take, the outcome may not be amazing, but the risk that they took was, and why aren't we assessing that or putting, some type of feedback that's qualitative on that shows the student that what they're doing is working really well, even though the product wasn't. And it's also about the insights that they've gained through the exploration of what they're doing. So let's look at some practical applications. And how do we put some creativity into practice? So these strategies are, I've tried to put it together quite simply because I could spend hours talking about this. Creativity, like I said, it is not about adding something on to our learning. It's about how we weave it into our existing curriculum. It's about putting it through it. And it's an outcome of and for learning. And it's really pedagogically the way that we learn. So whether it's asking our students to create a podcast instead of an essay, what is it? 100 written words is about a minute of spoken text that you can assess. Is it a student-led inquiry? Is it about, it's really about the ways our students feel seen, the way they feel safe when they're doing those big risk-taking things, and how are they supported? So you could begin with provocations or real-world issues. They can be things where you use card games in small groups with prompts. You can then ask them to build on that with ranking their ideas and thinking from those card games into a ranking ladder and annotating their thinking as a group. Everyone uses a different colour so that you can map the thinking and participation of everybody. And then you can collect those pieces of evidence of a learning continuum over a couple of sessions. You're also asking students to think and justify their annotations so that they can make visible the learning and the rationales for their creative process as well. How students integrate choice and voice in their learning pathways. So that could be through self-assessments, their choice of topics, or It's your choice of topic as well, but they can have some sort of input along the way. Feedback and feed forward to peers. Exploring their own strengths and weaknesses. I think that one's really important too, because when students have that growth mindset and they can understand what they're good and not good at, then that's what I actually want them to do. For example, I was working with a group of Year 11 art students who, they were choosing, the task was to look at an artist that they'd researched and then pick one of their artworks to try and create their folio work from it. And the student had said to me, but I don't like this artist's painting. And I said, but it's not about whether you like it or not. It's about understanding how their process of making is and how you can take something from it and practice with it and then create something yourself. And it took them a while because they're always used to doing things that they like or finding things that they like and make them feel good and are motivated by. But that's not going to test your skills and really grow you as an artist. So that was the conversation that I'd had with her and her classroom teacher about how do I get them to take those risks and step outside of it. Also, it's about using visual thinking routines, and I also then call that a creative constraint. Sometimes we're most creative when things aren't working well. We look for a solution. And that's most of the work that I do in education is I'm a problem finder and a problem solver. So creative constraints are okay as well. We don't have to always make everything free and easy. Sometimes the constraints allow us to develop a lot of different ways of doing things, which is, why we have the technology that we do, for example. Considerations for equity, ensuring that all students have access to creative opportunities. I find that differentiation with creativity is much more easier because it's really at the student's level, because it's where it's the, what would I call it? It's the equalizer of everything. Some kids might be creatively in terms of technique or skill. They may be able to create things better or write a more interesting poem or something like that. We're not all good writers, but it doesn't mean we can't write and we can't try in lots of different ways. So it's about how do we leverage different ways of students' expression in that way. So again, leveraging different digital tools and things like that. Interdisciplinary approaches for creative expression are really important. I'll talk more about that later. And like I said before, fostering that growth mindset. So we're getting to some final thoughts because I really want to spend more time answering questions that people have put forward. Even within constraints, teachers find moments to nurture creative confidence and curiosity. So creativity is integral to our society norms, competitiveness for jobs post-secondary, and creative thinking and collaboration are a hallmark of achieving them. I'm asking you to think about how are education systems in your school or education context focusing on those qualities as priorities when you're developing teaching and learning experiences. Because if they're not important enough to have it as a focus and they're not providing time for you to learn how to develop those skills or experiment with your students, then how can you do it? It's not just a ticker box. It does take time to develop this way of learning, not only with each other as teaching teams to develop the programs for it, but how to deliver it, and wait for those outcomes to come. My earlier research showed that many teachers feel conflicted with their desire to nurture creativity, and this might be some of you as well, and the constraints of rigid curricula and some of those other areas that we spoke about that are challenges in our work. And this belief and whether teachers think creativity can be taught is foundational to what happens in the classroom. So for me, I think the classroom, and that means teaching, learning, planning, wherever it is that you're doing any of that, is the space where we can explore creativity. So as educators, we need to focus on making available those spaces or opportunities for teachers and teams to engage in creativity. It might mean shifting some of your timetable. That's what I'm working in a school on at the moment, is how do we innovate in our timetable to try and make these experiences happen, and how do we design programs to fit within it as well. And how do we also manage academic accountability in that? You know, that's where the tension comes. You know, we've got all these outcomes to meet. Kids and parents, you know, give us pressure that they want these high academic results for our students. But we also want them to be creative, and we also want them to do all of these different things. It is possible, but it's not going to look the way people always expect. And that's where the challenge comes in. How do we educate our communities to understand change and what else is possible? You know, how else can things look? So for me, creativity is a way of being in the world. It's for learners, for teachers, and for those who want to imagine new possibilities. Fostering creativity isn't just about innovation, but it also empowers students, and I think teachers also, to have the transformational skill to think critically, connect ideas, and face future challenges with confidence. And so for me, whenever I'm working with teachers or students, I always ask the question, what else is possible? And so when you're planning and stuck on ideas and thinking, oh, what else can I do? Maybe that idea of what else is possible might be the starting point for you in helping you grow in your practice. So how much time do we have left, Han?
Plenty, Ingrid.
Oh,
So
good. Plenty of
20
time for
minutes.
questions.
Yeah,
Excellent.
20 minutes. Yeah.
So they're just some links to my research, and at the moment, my website got hacked, and so in the last week, I'm still struggling to try and fix it at the moment. But if you need to contact me with things, do so on LinkedIn. I'm now going to stop sharing, and I'll just go back to. I think I'll stop sharing now. So people did send through questions, and I will start to answer some of those questions. And if you've got extra questions, pop them in the chat and Han will help me navigate some of those. So people have asked, how can we plant the seed of creativity in students who believe that they're not capable of it? And that's a really great question, because a lot of students, including ourselves, don't feel we're creative enough to do some of the things that I've been talking about. And really, it's about vulnerability. I gave you that the story from my master's research about that teacher. It's about being vulnerable of how you share with them, make mistakes, and how you fail. It's about having low risk activities and having lots of play. And play can look like lots of different things to lots of different people, depending on your school environment and the resources you have available. It's about experimenting and doing a lot of formative learning work, formative assessment work as well. And sometimes I've worked in school settings where we actually made the formative assessment tasks reported on. So rather than just an essay or an exam or a summative task that was like a test, that was worth less. So let's pretend it was an essay. The formative process of the essay writing and the drafting and all of those sorts of things, we actually made visible as a reportable piece of assessment. And that was worth, say, 30% of the student's mark. And the actual essay itself was only worth 10%. And the reason for that is because we're trying to teach students that we're valuing as educators the process of how they learn rather than just the final piece of writing. And then there are other times where we just value the final piece of writing. So it really comes down to what is it that you want the student to take away from that learning experience? And when they understand how they learn as a learner, it's much easier to teach them. I have an example also from many years ago when I was teaching history. I was an English and history teacher of a group of Year 9 students. And luckily in that timetable space, I had a double for English and a double for history. So I had 4 periods that I could actually do this type of work in. So sometimes it's also about how do we do our teacher allocations for their workload so that we can maximise the way learning can happen and different ways of practice can happen with our students. And so in that, we were doing medieval studies. I decided that we would do food as a way of learning. And it was like asking the students to step in the shoes of being an anthropologist, like a historian. So it was really looking at artifacts so that they could understand how and why people lived in the way that they did. Can I make creativity into multi-graded classroom? I'll answer that question after this. So in English, they read recipes on how to make pancakes. And we read through the recipes. It was made on almond meal and almond milk and the kids are like, oh, why are they using almond milk? And that was before it was a trendy thing. And I said, well, if you had cow's milk, where would you store it? And they said a fridge. And I said, did they have that technology back then? No, they didn't. So it's now starting to get them thinking like a historian does to try and understand just from a recipe, we can actually learn more about people and how they lived rather than me standing out the front going, people in medieval times lived like this. They become the discoverer through the practice. And so they then had to go and research more about the times and all of those sorts of things. And we made the pancakes. They didn't quite like them because they didn't taste sweet and all of that sort of thing compared to what they were used to. But it really stimulated a lot of conversation and self-research for the students where I didn't have to create death by PowerPoint for them to learn about medieval history. It was about trying to find that internal connection that they wanted around something that was familiar and exploring it. How can a teacher effectively adapt to creative teaching? I think I've answered just some of that. Like the diverse learning that I had with that class, I had students, about 6 of those students were on ILPs and or individual learning plans. And it meant that every student could learn in that task, but how they wrote about their experience was really where it catered to their learning. But the overall experience of how they played was all the same. So it was an equalizer in terms of everyone had the same buy-in. Someone else asked about the multi-age. Again, the multi-age doesn't matter because I've often used the same activities for adults as what I have prep children. It's about adjusting the context and the language that you use. Can a focus on creativity help close learning gaps in diverse classrooms? I think it depends on you knowing your learners really well and how they learn, but also what type of learning gaps are you wanting to close? I need you to be a little bit more specific and then I can answer that question. So if I see it pop up, or Han, if you can keep an eye out for that question, that would be great. What are some practical strategies teachers can use to foster creativity in classrooms with limited resources? That has been most of my career, I think, working in places that had limited resources. Understanding what the outcome is that you're trying to achieve is the first important goal that you need to have. And then you can take, the students outside. I still take students outside. Prep kids, older kids, when there's something about taking students outside that they just get excited about. You've got to have good classroom management so they don't run away. But they enjoy going outside, and there are so many different ways that you can bring the outside into the classroom learning experiences. So they can go outside to collect data or information or observations and bring that back in. For
Dr. Ingrid,
example, yep.
I'm sorry, there are 3 more questions in the Q&A section on chat functions. If you can see on your Zoom.
Yep, I can see it. Yep.
On the Zoom, there are Q&A session and 3 questions, 9 questions waiting for your
quite a lot.
reply.
I was trying to address the questions also from what people had sent in, but I'll do these ones on the screen now. To those educators who must follow the intended curriculum, what do you suggest to them on fostering creativity in their classroom without going too far from the curriculum mandated? Well, that's all of us. I mean, most of the work that I do in education settings is around compliance. And so I also audit school settings, and I've done it in auditing university programs as well for compliance. So fostering creativity is your pedagogy. It's not your curriculum. So when you understand it from that point of view, it's the way in which you engage the students in the learning in order to meet the curriculum outcomes. So you can still do your curriculum outcomes. So for example, if I had a prep class and I wanted students to be inspired about writing about the beach, don't just give them a picture to look at, invoke the language that you want them to be developing. So to try and create vocabulary lists with young children, you can do this with older students as well. I hope you're sort of seeing that. It doesn't matter what age group, it's the prompt of the vehicle that you adapt based on their lexical capacity at the age that they're at. So, rather than just showing them a photo of the beach, bring in a bottle with salty water. If you're near a beach, that's great. Go and collect some. But if you're not, just fill a bottle with really super salty water and ask them to smell it. They can sit in a circle, ask them to smell it. What words do you use to describe how it smells? How does it taste? How does it feel? And you can have those 3 categories and build vocabulary lists. That's creative practice. So you're still meeting your curriculum outcomes for developing language frameworks as well as linguistic structures and features, but you're doing it from prompts that try and elicit different ways of thinking and processing. And there's also something really important with creativity, which is around embodied learning. It's this stuff, it's the visceral, it's how you touch things and ask students to write things down, think and use our senses. That has such a more profound scaffolding of cognitive development. So there's something about trying to make those connections that students can then build upon as your learning happens. So I hope that I've answered that question. How do I make my instructions better when someone does not participate in my class? That the reason why I'm laughing is because it happens to everybody. Students who are not engaged, I think, is what you're trying to ask there. And I did have a prompt response to something like that, where someone had asked about how do I incorporate creative practice into 35-minute sessions while addressing declining students' levels of behaviour. So I think that's sort of the same thing. For me, it doesn't matter what the age group is. It's about reading your students. If it's period 5 and 6 on a Friday, you want to be doing a lot of activities that break up the session and get them up out of their seats. So I always have a structure of, a 5-minute warm-up that's a body movement one, a 5-minute task that's based on me and my learning as an individual, and then I can do 15 to 20 minutes as a group. Now, on a Friday afternoon, I think them as a group is probably you're going to get more value out of that than you will them working on their own. And there are other times where they can spend more time working on their own than working as a group. It's really about you figuring out what that looks like. As a group, they can be annotating and writing things together. And then they still need 5 minutes at the end of their session to reflect. So that could be an exit slip, smiley faces as a picture for prep kids. It can be really simple. Mentimeter is a digital tool that you can use that you can set up with Likert scales and things like that, where you can ask students to just click what they think and give you feedback. You have to remember that when you're asking students to be challenged with things or they're trying to do something new, not all students like change. So you need to do this in very small steps, adjust with their learning style along the way as well is really important. Is benchmarking considered a form of creativity? Benchmarking, I'm not sure what you're meaning by that, but when I benchmark a school, I go in and analyze all their data, and then I, understand where they want their data to move to, and we the work I'm doing in one school at the moment, it's an 18-month process to re-benchmark the assessments of a school. That's the way in which I do it might be creative, I suppose, but I think I have a system of doing it that I know works and gets the outcomes. So I'm not sure that benchmarking is a form of creativity because it's a technical administrative process that you're doing. Any tips for utilizing certain academic tools such as AI-based tools? That's a really good question. So people have asked me about AI and creativity before, and to me, I don't worry about AI because the human voice and who you are as an individual and how you think and all of those sorts of things can't be replicated by a digital tool. The essence of who we are as human beings, I don't think it can do. And so that's where you can get students to use AI tools, but it depends on understanding, am I using it just to ideate something? Because it's really about the process that you're looking for. Sometimes it could be ideation, but if you know the kids get the ideation really well, then maybe it's okay to use AI afterwards. But it's making sure they've learnt the skill themselves in the first place. I do know that like some kids in this art class that I was telling you about before, I was working with their teacher, and they said that their student used an image generator in AI to create the ideas that they had in their head of what they wanted to do as their final artwork. And I said, well, why would you do that? Because it's that process that we're looking at assessing. So you've used the AI generator to take away from how you think. And that's actually what I care about. I don't care about the end result in that sense of the final piece looking perfect. It was that part of it, the way that they put the composition together. And he said, well, I want the composition to look a certain way. And I said, but that's part of your learning to show me how that will eventuate. And you might not get it right the first time. And then you try another sketch, and then you try another sketch until you get it. So the immediacy of response or result that some students want is, I think, where it becomes challenging. Language teachers to break the language barriers inside with creativity. Well, I think I gave you an example there with, prep kids writing about the beach. It's based on their language capacity and proficiency, whether it's a ESL or EAL student, or, we've got a lot of students where I work at the moment that English is not their first language. But we all know what something smells like, and we know what it tastes like, and we know how it feels. And so that's the perfect opportunity to start building that vocabulary for the students, because the process of creativity is going to be the same. It's just the words and the mechanics that you're trying to teach them is what they're learning on top of it. What sources do I usually look for creative ideas? Many years of practice and trying stuff and asking kids. I ask students, what's something else you could do? Let's try it. I used to have, when I taught many years ago, I have a box in my classroom, in a primary school classroom, and they'd put their ideas in. I'd pull it out once a week and we'd do it for better or worse sometimes. When you have that lull in the day, I'd go pull that out to get everyone re-energized. Creativity in a philosophy subject. I don't have enough time in this class. I used to actually work as a consultant for philosophy in schools, teaching philosophy. Really, philosophy is about how are you teaching discursive practice as an evidence of language development and metacognitive thinking, and how are you teaching those words? So where is the meta language in your glossary and your units of work that you're focusing on, so you're listening for it in the students' evidence of work? So teaching them great transition signals. I heard what so-and-so was saying, and I think this based on whatever it is. You're trying to teach them the connectors in that sense.
I think we still have time for one or two more questions.
Yeah, I'm just trying to look at being creative in a different medium. I do editing, writing stories, guitar, reading. How can I continue on making sure I'm progressing for each hobby of mine? Document it. Keep a journal is what I would do. Keep a reflective journal on your creative process. And it could be something as simple as like a PMI thinking tool. What are the positives I've experienced? What are the negatives? And what do I find interesting that I want to know more about? It can be something as simple as that. Reading, I'm just trying to make sure that I'm covering questions that I haven't answered before. What kind of creativity or motivating the student to study the lesson that they're not pressured to do it because nowadays we consider their mental health? So are you saying that we're worried about pushing kids into doing creative activities that they may not be comfortable with? So I have a few answers for that one. There's a boy that I worked with many years ago who was on the spectrum, and he had a teacher also working with him in the classroom next door. This was in a secondary school. And she struggled with him behaviour-wise because she didn't understand his learning needs or his learning style. She wasn't as experienced. She was a new graduate, and he hated everything creative. And I walked into her classroom and had a bit of a chat with him just to get to know him because I was going to teach him in the next term. And hated everything, hated art, hated media, hated everything, according to him. And I would come in each week just to have a little bit of a chat with the other kids, but really it was about talking with him because he was a really big behaviour problem in her classroom. And I started to have the conversations with him to find out where his comfort zone of communication was. And then when I did end up having him in class, he was great because I built the rapport of trust. And so if you don't have the trust and the relationship with that student built first, then you can't ask them to do something more. So for some kids with ASD, they don't like touching things. They don't like sitting with groups of kids. He was great. He found his place in the classroom where he felt comfortable sitting, but I was always asking him and reading him to try and understand what mediums he preferred working with, how he needed to learn. There were times where his day was not working for him, and he was able to articulate it, which was good. And I would say, okay, well, I'll come back and I'll just leave you be. And then I still wanted the outcome met. So I broke it down as small as I could so that it even got to the point where I said to him, how about I be your scribe and you just tell me what to do? Because the act of typing is not what I was assessing. It was his act of thinking and the words he was using. So if I can get that documented down, he can have some success for the day and we'll try again the next period. So I think that the relationship you have with your students is key. Do we have any other time for another question, or is that it at the moment, Han?
Yeah, one more question will be good.
Yep. Okay. Do I think developing students' creativity should be a learning goal or a tool to be used to better achieve student learning outcomes? Yes, it's a pedagogy. For me, it's a pedagogy. It's a way that I can develop learners' thinking. Now, there are some times where I don't use it and I just do tutorial drill and practice because I think that's important. You can't, for example, you can't play a game of basketball if you haven't learned to bounce the ball. But there are other things that I can use for creative practice and creative thinking that are really valuable too. So it's really about understanding what is the best way that I can get these students to learn the learning outcome, and creative pedagogy may be one of them. A different pedagogy might be better for your classroom. You know, it really depends on the learner. There are some times where I haven't been able to do the activities I would usually use for a certain age group just because of the cohort of kids in that class. Could be based on class size, the room space. Like I don't have the room to actually get kids up and doing body movement activities as a in-between break session of a really long double period. Again, it's about being flexible with your approaches. So I hope I've answered many people's questions, and I hope that you've been able to take something away from this webinar in regards to your own practice, or wanting to try different things with your students and understanding your students a little bit more, and around the ways we can use creativity in our teaching.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Lee, and thank you all for joining us today. Again, to tell you the truth, being with this webinar series, this is the first session that we've received that many questions from the attendants, and this is
Oh,
like
wow.
the longest Q&A, section of our webinar. Long but still interactive, and people still stays to the end, to ask and listen to your answers. So thank you again, Dr. Lee, for your inspiring presentation. And we trust that our attendants today have gathered valuable insights and practical ideas to make their teaching and their students' learning really creative. Thank you again, Miss.
Thank you very much for your invitation to share with everybody. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. And thank you for your energy to be with us today. Midnight already on your
It's
end.
past
But
midnight. I'm ready to go to
yeah,
sleep.
yeah, yeah. We do hope that you have sweet dreams tonight, being here with us, seeing all of, the interactive, participants. And thank you again, participants, for your attention. And before we say goodbye, don't forget, please help us to enhance your experience by taking a moment to complete the post-webinar survey, which will pop up after you leave this webinar. Again, after you leave this Zoom webinar, you will be receiving, a link to complete a survey. Okay. After you're receiving the survey and completing the survey, there will be some instructions for you on how to download your certificates. And the instruction will be sent to you within 1 day after today's session, which means tomorrow. Okay. Again, leave this webinar and then you receive a link to complete the survey. Then you will receive instruction to download your certificate within 1 day. Okay, before we leave, let's look ahead to our next exciting webinar. Set a reminder for June the 13th, 2025 at the same time, 8:30 p.m. Vietnam time. We'll be diving into another engaging webinar with two esteemed presenters, Ms. Linda Agnet from the USA and Ms. Violetta Antaka from Poland. We will explore ways on how to leverage assessment and rewards in the classroom. Stay tuned for detailed information and registration updates on our EduVerse platform and media in our newsletters. And don't forget to join us on our Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram for more updates and practical teaching ideas.